The first main anxiety disorder we're going to cover today is generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. Let's start by reviewing some statistics around GAD. So GAD affects about 3% of the adult population. And what that means is that at any given time, about 3% of people will have GAD. Slightly different from that is that 9% of people will develop GAD at some point in their lives, but it could actually go into remission. From a gender perspective, women are about twice as likely to have generalized anxiety disorder as men. It can be triggered by an adverse life event. And what this means is that there may be an event that appropriately causes anxiety, but then after the event is over, the anxiety actually doesn't go away. It kind of sticks around. And so one of the things that I kind of start with when people come into my office and they're worried about anxiety is I'll ask them a really simple screening question. Would you describe yourself as a worrier? And people sort of identify with this. They'll call themselves worrywarts, or other people will call them worrywarts. No one really uses that term anymore. And if people do identify as worriers, then this particular module may be really useful for you. So generalized anxiety disorder is characterized by a general tendency to worry. It doesn't necessarily disable you, but it makes simple or easy tasks significantly more difficult. Things take more time and energy to accomplish because of the worry in your head. You can worry about lots of different things, and your mind kind of jumps from one to another. It isn't really focused. It's almost as if your mind is in worrying mode, and if one thing is no longer worrying you, then instead of being at peace, your mind goes and looks for something else. So the next thing that I want to do is cover some clinical features of GAD. And so these are what really as psychiatrists we look for when we're looking for a proper diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. So the first clinical feature is that the intensity, duration, and frequency of anxiety is out of proportion with reality. And what that means is that everyone is prone to a certain amount of anxiety, but for people who suffer from generalized anxiety disorder, their anxiety is way worse than reality would suggest. And you may have seen this sometimes if friends of yours have anxiety and you kind of tell them, hey man, like you're kind of completely out of whack. Or people will try to tell you, hey, you don't really need to worry, but you can't help yourself because your mind is so caught up in worrying about something. The next clinical feature has to do with sort of how long the anxiety lasts and how often it presents. And so what we really look for a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder is symptoms that last for 6 months and happen more often than they don't. And so what we're talking about is that for like at least half a year, you have more worry-filled days than worry-free days. The next thing goes to the topics that people worry about in generalized anxiety disorder. And this is what really separates it from other kinds of anxiety disorders like social anxiety disorder. So in generalized anxiety disorder, the reason we call it generalized is because people worry about a lot of different stuff. So we're talking about stuff like job performance, academic performance, not being able to live up to your responsibilities, being worried about health, being worried about your finances, and being worried about random kinds of misfortune or catastrophe. Furthermore, in people with generalized anxiety disorder, a lot of these worries happen without a clear precipitant. So for example, a lot of people are going to worry about possibly failing a test the night before. But people with generalized anxiety disorder will be worried about getting kicked out of school for no reason. Like they'll wake up at Saturday at like 10 a.m. while they're on vacation, and their mind is like, oh my God, you better be careful, you may get kicked out of school. So it's really disproportionate and doesn't really require a clear precipitant. Another key aspect of GAD is that these worries are accompanied by physical symptoms. And so what that means is that the worries aren't just in your head, but they're so bad that they actually start to wreck your body. We're talking about stuff like muscle tension, trembling, twitching, feeling shaky. People can get a lot of achiness or soreness, especially around the shoulders and neck. And these physical symptoms wear on you so much that they kind of like run you down. And people with anxiety like feel sort of like their anxiety kind of burns up all of their energy and makes it very hard for them to do things. People with anxiety also, or generalized anxiety disorder, also have difficulty sleeping and can suffer from insomnia. Anxiety also significantly affects our GI system and can cause things like stomach cramps, diarrhea, queasiness, and nausea. Interestingly enough, while generalized anxiety disorder can cause some cardiac symptoms, things like elevated heart rate or high levels of adrenaline are more associated with panic attacks. So for GAD, I'm really paying attention to things like your GI system and skin. So in summary, you should consider really getting evaluated for GAD if you meet some of the following criteria. The first and foremost is you identify as a worrier. When I ask you, are you a worrier, you know what that means, whereas normal people kind of don't. If simple tasks are significantly harder to do because of your worry gets in the way and impairs your function in job performance, in academics, interferes with your personal relationships, with your health. If your worries tend to be about a lot of different things, if your mind is looking for something to worry about, and even if you can calm it down about one thing, if it kind of shifts to something else, then you should really consider getting clinically evaluated. And if you worry so hard that it actually affects your body, and you get and understand that everyone else worries, but people don't seem to get how bad your worry actually is. Everyone gets stressed out about things, but even the people who are stressed out seem to be like fine in a few hours or the next day, whereas your stress actually makes you pretty miserable for days at a time, or even weeks or months at a time. It's important to remember that in generalized anxiety disorder, your worries may have been triggered by an event, but that they seem to stick around far longer than they should, and that even after the event is over, you're still kind of plagued with this anxiety. And so if you resonate with a lot of these experiences, if you identify with this stuff, you should really consider getting evaluated for an anxiety disorder. Because the simple truth is that you don't have to live like this. There's actually treatment for these kinds of things. And the goal of this module is really to equip you with this information so you can go and actually get a mental health evaluation if it feels kind of appropriate, and you can do something about your anxiety so that you can start to have more energy, you can start to live more worry-free, and you can actually start to live life the way that you want to. So by all means, go get evaluated, and we'll move on to a couple of other topics soon. So it affects about 3% of adults. Is that an airplane? Yeah. Okay. So look confused or smile?
Look confused.
Got it.